Here today, I have my favourite podcast partner. I say that to everybody, Rebecca Norton, and we're going to look at something which I don't think gets discussed or worked upon anything like enough. Evaluation in general doesn't of any learning event, but here we're talking about coaching. Here's the headline: the evaluation of coaching, why, how, and issues. So we set ourselves quite a task here, and I think this is going to be good. I've really been looking forward to this one because I've got a feeling, Rebecca, we're going to break some new ground here for anybody that has the good fortune to listen to this. So before we get into it, as ever, over to you to tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do, and kick us off with this.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, Andrew. It's Rebecca Norton from Sense of Direction. And I think this is a really good topic. It's quite a meaty topic to get into as well. I think, it's one of those long time issues of how do we evaluate things, and is there any point in it, and what do we do with the information once we've got the evaluation as well. And as a trainer, it's something that's drilled into us when I was doing all my training is you must get evaluation, you want some feedback, make sure, and it's interesting because there's a number of different aspects to consider with evaluation. One, have I been a good trainer or coach in this case? Have I delivered what I've set out to deliver and get across? And also, has it landed right with the participants or the coachees, the person being coached? Have they taken from it something useful? But I do enjoy this, I love getting the feedback from people and hearing the nice comments and things, but then it's like, well, what do I do with these now? How does that influence me going forward? How does that influence those people who's been coached and on these training courses and things as well? So there's a lot of different aspects around evaluation. I mean, I'm not sure what things have you found around evaluation?
Wow, crikey, like you say, if you're not careful, especially for someone like me who's so old and been doing this for so long, we can get very anecdotal here, and it's going to be hard to keep ourselves on track, which is the evaluation of coaching specifically. But I think you're right. Everyone involved in the delivery of any learning development of any sort should know ethically that it's incumbent on them to prove the value of what they've done. And sometimes that value is disappointing. Sometimes it's not as extensive a value as we'd have liked it to be, hence the involvement of ethical issues, because I think that's one reason we don't choose to do it when we might do it as thoroughly as it could be. So I think evaluation is big, it's important, it's essential. I don't think it's done very well generally, and I certainly don't think it's done very well in a coaching context particularly.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess that's one of the key words within the word itself, isn't it? Value, evaluate. What's the value of that coaching? And it's interesting because often at the end, with my current coaching clients, I will send them a questionnaire at the end of the coaching program or whatever program it is that I've done with them, and it has a series of questions on and things, but it often does just scratch the surface, I think, and I guess for me, it's deciding at what point do you evaluate as well, because ultimately what I would really like to do is I want some feedback straight after I finish coaching the person. But I think sometimes that's too soon because I don't think they've had the time to impact and use the information. So I think actually 6 months down the line would be a good time to go back to that person and say, all right, now can you give me some feedback? What's been the impact of having the coaching and how has it made a difference? And I think sometimes that's quite difficult then, because by then the person may have gone off somewhere and forgotten about it, and I'll get round to it at some point or other. So it's quite difficult to gather good feedback and good evaluation, sort of that quality evaluation. I think that's the word, isn't it? It's quality. You can do tick boxes and score out of 10 and stuff, but it doesn't necessarily give you lots of information to work with then.
Absolutely. And I've got 4 lines on the screen here, and this is not a menu. This is not something for us to go through one at a time. It's, if you like, a series of themes that will come in and out of and interchange and return to and so on, because I'm already saying to myself, okay, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. And so much of this is intermeshed because the why is involved in the how and the application of learnings, and they're constantly, and I think contracting's in there, something we talked about to establish a baseline. there's so much to do well in order for this to be meaningful. The most important thing for me, I guess, as I'm thinking about this, and thinking about it really already in a depth I've not thought about it before in the context of coaching, the most important thing for me is that it's important. that it's essential that showing value, particularly in times of scarce resource, which in January of 2021 we're talking about, it's crucially important. You get meaningful, not happy sheet stuff. Was that all right? Yes. Okay, good. Whoa, that's a relief, because I don't think we got anything out of that at all. Those sorts of things. Yeah, it's meaningful value that we're returning to those we work with. And the only way to do that is by their changed and better behavior. They attribute to what we do long term. You mentioned 6 months. That's long term. It's long term in most evaluations.
Yeah.
1 or 5 years. But certainly 6 months, that's stretching it by 5.5 months or 5 months and 30 days than most who rely on a happy sheet.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting because it's just made me think. I did do a coaching session. So it was a sort of a 2-hour intensive coaching session with a lady last January. And she was wanting to change careers and stuff, and she found it a very useful session, and she gave me some good feedback. But what's been the nice thing is, in the last couple of weeks, she's actually sent me a message and put out on her social media that she's starting a new job. And she did actually attribute that as a result of some of the work that we'd done last January. And for me, that was absolutely fantastic. I was so pleased that she'd shared that. So for me, that's shown that the coaching had an impact. I can't, it's certainly not the be all and end all. And I think this is where it gets difficult, isn't it? Is because the coaching will have had an impact, but there'll have been other things at play as well. And sometimes the coaching is a catalyst for them to do other things. So it's enabled them to maybe take different steps that perhaps they wouldn't have had the confidence to do before, or hadn't had the skills. So I think for some people, they might see a link between the coaching and what they've achieved, but it might not be as clear as what we think it could be. If as coaches, we're looking at it and we can see, actually, we've helped them to improve their confidence, which led them to be able to do this, this, and this, and then they achieved that result.
Absolutely. Crikey, this is deep, isn't it? And we knew it would be, because there are other factors in there too. They might be wrong. They might be saying to themselves, hey, crikey, that Rebecca Norton, it's largely down to her I got this job. Well, maybe it wasn't. But it kind of doesn't matter in a sense. It's the perception people have of what we do. And I'm not decrying what you did, by the way. All I'm saying is, whether the feedback is positive, negative, or whatever it is, it's in the hands of the perception of the people we work with and nothing else. Because we might have a very different perception of that than the learner has. And we've been talking about positive feedback. It isn't always positive. I've been in the business, I keep saying this every time I do this, I must be very aware of it. This is nearly my 39th, getting on for 40 years in the business of learning. And the individual specific single bits of feedback I remember most to this day have always been the most damning, the least valuable, the most abusive sometimes. The things, I might get 600 bits of feedback in a year. If I get 3 of those which are actually disappointing, they're the 3 I remember, and I do. And there's something about coaching which probably makes that less likely, because of the intimacy is the word I'm going to use, but the closeness, the relationship, people are perhaps less likely to see, well, actually, Andrew, this is a complete waste of time for me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think there's a couple of points I want to pick up on there. Is one, it's often human nature that, like you say, we get 30 odd, 50 odd pieces of good feedback. We get 1 or 2 negative ones, and they're the ones we focus on, and that's often not necessarily to do with us. That's where the person is, but we focus on the negative things. That's so much human nature, and as a coach, that is something that I would work with clients on, is to help them to not focus on the negative, yet we do it ourselves as well. So I think, it is interesting, isn't it, that we do that. But sometimes I find, and again, I'm sort of with you in that, and I will focus on the negative ones to some extent, but it doesn't necessarily, just because it's not good, doesn't necessarily mean it's not helpful. So for me, getting a series, like you said, getting a load of 10s on a tick sheet to say, yes, you did a brilliant job, is actually not as helpful as somebody saying, well, I didn't like this bit and this didn't work for me and what have you, because I can work with that. I can improve that. Knowing that I've done everything brilliantly or done well, that's actually not going to help me improve any further, where constructive feedback is really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many of us are brave enough to have an evaluation form, if that's what we use, that says, what do you think I could have done better?
Mm. Yeah. And it is, but again, I do ask that. I don't mind having that. So for me, when I've been doing my teaching and training and things and I've been observed, I actually don't have a problem with being observed. A lot of people find it really nerve-wracking, but for me, I do see it as an opportunity to develop.
Mm-hmm.
But like you've just touched on before, is often, you know, people don't want to upset you, so they might not have enjoyed it that much, or they might not have got as much out of it as, but they have to then be brave and say, well, actually, this didn't work for me. But for them to do that, we have to have that really good relationship. So I would hope that I build
or a really bad one.
well, yeah, that's true as well. Then they don't care, do they? You know, they're not worried about it. But for me, I would hope that I build that good relationship with somebody that makes them feel that they can give me constructive feedback. It doesn't have to be negative, but it can be constructive, and it can give me things that I need to improve on. And I genuinely don't mind that, and I try and get that across to people.
And what's the point of only getting that at the end?
Yeah, and you need it partway through.
Yeah.
As well. Getting it at the end, and because this is the other interesting thing about evaluation, isn't it? Is when do you do it?
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't do it at the end only. Because if you feel something's gone well in a coaching context, let's keep reminding ourselves we're talking about in a coaching context. If you can find the feedback you seek to at the end of a process that would have been useful to been informed of those things earlier, well, you're losing opportunity.
Yeah. So it's sort of being mindful, isn't it? It's sort of, I think this comes down to a little bit of reflection. You know, when we've been talking about reflection before, during, and after, for me, it links to that as well. So I know I don't always do this actually, but it's something that I aim to, and it's something that I know other people have said that they do, and it was something that was encouraged in our training, was to ask at the end of every session, what worked well for you this session?
And then the issue is, because there's so many nuances to this, then the issue is there's value in getting that immediate unthought through perception. There's a different value from them thinking about it, even if only for 30 seconds or 30 minutes, to think, actually, now I'm about to get into the car again, I want to revise what I just said to you half an hour ago when I hadn't thought about it. So it's such a nuanced issue, this, and there's so many influences on it. Yes, it's big, but its complexity shouldn't deter us from doing it well.
No, definitely not. And I think for me, the more that people understand the impact of coaching, that the better it is, because they can then see the value of coaching as well. Because I think it can be quite difficult as coaches, you know, coaching is not necessarily always going to be a cheap process, and especially if it's a longer term thing. So people have to understand the value of it, and there is, but that value might come further down the line. You know, it might not be immediate. I hope it is. You know, I hope that my clients always get immediate value, but I think actually the bigger value comes further down the line after the
absolutely. And not everyone, although they might nod, not everyone totally accepts that. I kind of can reflect on times when working corporately in particular, I'm sat in front of a commissioned client, if you like, someone who actually pays for the coaching of maybe 4 or 5 people within the organization. And what I know they're thinking is, 3 months on, haven't seen much yet.
It is, and it's difficult, isn't it? So again, I think as an individual, that individual can make a decision as to whether it's been value or not. If you're working with corporate clients and you have somebody who, like you said, who's commissioned that service, they're not necessarily being the one being coached, but for them, it might be a bit more of a stretch to understand how the coaching has actually benefited the individuals, the organisation, and they might not see a return on investment straight away, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not been valuable. And I think this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Correct. There's so many strands of this we can go down, and you know, I'm trying ever so hard not to take account of all the distracting memories I've got of being in situations where this impacts directly, because ultimately the value we can return is down to the motivation and the preparedness of individuals to apply their learning. Not everyone has that appetite, and even though we prepare people for that to happen, a lot of people disappoint me by not doing what they could on their own behalf for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good thing. We can't take all the responsibility as coaches for the success or otherwise of our clients, because ultimately it is down to them. We
Nor
can
can we
give
take all the credit.
support, but they have to take the actions.
Yeah, nor can we take all the credit. So it's
No,
not
definitely
our
not.
fault when it doesn't happen. It's absolutely not down to us that it does. It's entirely down, both things, to the learner. If the learner can't be bothered, or if the learner says, yeah, I've learned all this stuff, I can see how I can change things here, but if I do, then it might not work and I might look stupid, so I'm not going to do it. If that's the case, is that our fault? To a degree. Maybe we didn't prepare them enough. Maybe we didn't do what could have been done to prepare the ground for people. So I'm not saying there's no responsibility there. But equally, if the learner says, hey, I've learned all this stuff, I'm bloody amazing. Aren't I great? Look at the, it's all down to me. Oh, that Andrew Gibbons, well, yeah, it was nice to chat it through with him. But hey, I'm a changed person. That's entirely, I don't care. I've never cared. In as much that if it doesn't matter who takes the credit, let's just get some learning applied.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things, isn't it? I think this is where a lot of the it's linked to our perception. Like you said, there's a lot going on perception in it here and how valuable that is. And we might see a massive change in our clients where for them, they don't see it as obvious. I think sometimes yourself, it's really difficult to recognize changes, but your family or your colleagues or your friends might notice a huge difference in you. Yeah, that's the other interesting thing, isn't it? So sometimes I think actually it'd be good to get the evaluation from the other people around the.
Yeah, well done. I was doing there myself. You got in ahead of me. It's what I would know core, because I've been watching quite a bit of Marshall Goldsmith, who's wonderful with his green polo shirts. Stakeholder evaluation. In other words, there's a value to be gained from the self-perception of a learner. There's a different and perhaps stronger value, a more objective value, to say, okay, you work with this guy. How's he changed? Okay, you manage this fella. Have you seen any changes? Does that go on? I don't think so.
No, but I think that would be really useful, wouldn't it? I think, I'm just wondering now, getting onto the sort of how best to evaluate things.
Yeah.
I'm wondering actually how we could do that, because for me, I think I would like to see that impact, you know, for my individual clients. What do their family think? Have their family noticed a difference? Have their friends noticed a difference? I don't know how I would get that information. I mean, and some of them may well see that, you know, every now and then you will hear a client say, oh, you know, my partner's really noticed a difference in this, and I'm not shouting as much, and I'm not, you know, this and that. So you sometimes get it anecdotally, but I do wonder if there's a good way of getting that information. I suppose it's easier in a corporate environment.
It's around that, Rebecca. What are the ethics?
Exactly. What are the ethics around that? If that, obviously I wouldn't do it without their permission.
Yeah.
You know, but I think it would
a surprise. Be... Well, I've asked all your friends and family what they think of you, and this is the results. That's the wrong thing to do.
But I think it may be worth me sort of pursuing that to an extent and including that. So even if I didn't get the feedback back myself, I think it would be a good thing for my client to do, is to actually say, you know what, go to your friends and your family and see what they've noticed, see if they've seen any difference.
Crikey. That again, I'm thinking immediately of the downside. I can see a big upside when it works well. I can see difficulties in terms of, I mean, there's a great term in transactional analysis, which is not a subject I know particularly well. I just know some buzzwords around it, called cashing in your stamps. And if you cash in your stamps, that means basically, here's an opportunity to tell this person what I really think. And you never know, even when you think you know someone well in their context well, you've got to be careful about not giving some people you least expect to cash in their stamps. So you don't want someone saying, hey, Rebecca, Norton's asked me what I think of you. And I'll tell you what, you got worse. You were bad at this. You are even worse. Now you're useless ways to speak. Obviously, that's extreme. I don't think that would happen at all. But it does nonetheless provide the opportunity for people to get harmful feedback that they wouldn't otherwise have got.
Yeah, that is true. And this is where it's so complicated, isn't it? You know, and part of our role as coaches, I think, is to prepare people for... And building their resilience and preparing people to deal with things that happen that perhaps are negative or whatever as well. And I think for me, that is around that role of resilience, and not necessarily in just this context, but in other things as well, is learning to recognise what's theirs and what's not theirs.
I've worked with clients expressly on seeking and acting on feedback, whereby it's part of the coaching activity to say, right, we agree that you would get benefit from more clarity about what people you work with think of you, where that becomes part of the coaching content, not of the evaluation. And that's always tricky, very interesting, very worthwhile, very impactful, and very, of course, tangible, because we usually end up producing a document that says, what do you think I do well? What do you think I can improve? But we've had all the discussions when, are you sure you're ready for what you might get back? How are you going to react to people who disappoint you with what they say? Do you think they're going to get accurate feedback? Are they just going to be cozy? Are they going to question the rationale for this and all that sort of stuff? So yeah, feedback is always tricky. We talked about that before. I'm not decrying what you're saying, because I think there's value in stakeholder evaluation. I'm not quite sure how I'd go about it myself.
Yeah, it is interesting. And just to go touch on that about the asking for feedback from people, I did have a client who would ask people, so she worked in quite a large organization, and she did a lot around sort of training, and she was in a managerial position, I think, sort of a middle manager, but she constantly asked for feedback all the time from lots of different people. And actually what I suggested to her is to stop doing that. Wasn't helpful to her to do that, and her self-esteem was quite low, and the more she asked for feedback, it sort of fed into a negative loop. And so I think the other key thing is to ask for a feedback from an appropriate person. And that's the key. It's not just anybody, because like you say, some people will take the chance to have a real dig, where you need to be specific about what feedback you want, what you want it for as well, and just be very careful about who you ask that feedback from.
Yeah, I think so. Let's dig into one or two other disease specifically, because this is proving to be as interesting a topic as I thought it would. I mean, on here I've got how best to evaluate. We've been talking about that. We've been talking about bringing in other parties. We've been talking about not relying on immediate feedback. We've been all that sort of stuff. Now, I've said in here, do conventional models apply? Well, I guess that's model singular, because an awful lot of people don't know different beyond Kirkpatrick. And that's not saying people don't know enough. Well, maybe it is, but certainly the Kirkpatrick model is so indelible in the learning and development industry, and it has been since about 1836 or whatever it is. He first did it. He's on Members of Family now, Donald. I think he might be departed. I looked him up recently, but I know Members of Family are now writing about the model and so forth. Just like the Belbins is a dynasty of team building, so now the Kirkpatrick family, quite rightly, it's a good model. And it's so simple. Number one, are people reacting in a way which is going to make learning possible, or are they don't really want to be here, don't see the point of this? So reaction level 1, learning level 2, is there evidence of learning? How do you find that out? Question and answer, asking things, blah, blah, blah. We should know this. Reaction, learning, then the tricky bits, because that's kind of validation. Are you achieving what you said you'd do there and then? Then we move out of the what used to be the classroom and what might be again if pandemic allows. So we've done reaction, we've done learning, then we move into the workplace. Are they applying learning? Is there evidence of application of learning? This is where it usually falls to pieces. And then if there has been application of learning, and you said it earlier, time allows this to be measured. Beyond application of learning, what is the impact on that? Not just in their own learning, has there been, and there isn't always, an organizational impact? It gets called different things, sometimes additional layers are overlaid on it, but it's essentially reaction learning, application, impact. That's how I always think of it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good way of looking at it, isn't it? But it is interesting. I think depending on what questions you ask, that depends on the quality of an answer that you get as well. On the thing, whichever way, and ultimately, I think these sort of evaluations are good. But then, what do we do with that data as well? What do we do with that information?
I know so many. I'll come back to my point a bit, but you've distracted me now, so this one's your fault. I know so many organisations that, with great pride, show me their typical happy sheets, sometimes more than that, And they say, look at this, look how thoroughly we evaluate our training. So great, well done. What do you do with it? And they look at you blank, like, that's enough, isn't it? Well, there you go then.
Yeah. How do you evaluate your coaching sessions then and programs with people?
Oh, wow. I want to get back to the Kirkpatrick model sometime, but let's go where you've taken me. How do I evaluate? Well, first of all, I think, and we've talked about contracting. We talked about contracting in the past, both as a process, a whole process. What do you want to get out of this coaching process, but also transactionally, what is it that you want to get from this session, as opposed to, wow, that was good, wasn't it? Was it what you wanted? So I think we need a baseline. We need a baseline. And for me, if you contract thoroughly and in a structured way, you've got a baseline, at least what was at the time felt to be an appropriate baseline. Because the problem with even establishing a baseline, there's so many ifs and buts on this whole process. You can sit down with the client and say, what do you want to get from this? We're going to work together for, say, 6 months. What do you want the outcomes to be? And at that time, totally blind of what's actually going to happen, the client says, well, I want this and I want that. And great, okay, we'll do that, blah, blah, blah. But who's to say that those were reasonable, that they were practicable, that they were right, that they should be revisited, blah, blah, blah. So you need a baseline. Otherwise, what you're measuring, if you're making a journey, what that is, how do you know it's been 15, 20 miles or 30 miles if you don't know where you started from?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You almost need coaching to start to decide what it is that you want coaching on.
Please. We can tie ourselves into silly knots on this, but I think we got to keep trying to find the core issues. And I think the core issue, in answer to your question, how do I go about it, is trying to establish a baseline which is meaningful. Maybe a baseline which is revisited, maybe a baseline which is revised, but nonetheless clarity about what you are trying to achieve. If you aren't clear about what you're trying to achieve, how the hell can you measure it, because you never knew what it was in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, we've touched on this before, haven't we? At the beginning of a coaching relationship, is that contracting is really important, you know, and how do you measure that? So I think for myself, I will always do that in a session. You know, we'll discuss that, the baseline and for the whole of the coaching program. Then we'll do it in a session at beginning and end, because things change. And I think that's the other thing, is like you said, sometimes you will start off and this is what they want, but actually part way through they decide that actually that's not what they want and they want something else. So just checking in as we're going along through that program.
Yeah.
But then I suppose when come the end of that coaching relationship, I do try and look and get some information around the impact of coaching. So not just whether they've achieved the results, because that might be a bonus to some extent. For me, it's more about the journey. So what have they learned along the way about themselves? What skills have they developed? So sometimes it's the more intangible things that I want to know about, because that's often what has the bigger impact. But it's how do we measure some of those things?
Yeah, I've just been here, a focus on performance improvement. I think if you're clear from the outset on where your focus is, and for me the focus is on improving performance, all the time everything you do should be contributing to giving that person the opportunity to be better at what they do. And if that is truly your focus and you stay true to it, that helps. If you're in some airy-fairy, well, we want to, I don't know, improve your capability to do X, Y, or Z, or we want you to be more resilient, we want you to be more capable of generating creative ideas. That's great, but it's a little bit airy-fairy. And I think if your focus is constantly on improving performance and you're constantly checking in as to what that looks like. So we're all the time here, Rebecca, we're looking to improve your performance. How is what we're saying now going to do that? What are you going to do about this? How are we going to know? What we're going to see that shows that you've become a more effective person in the workplace? Now, all right, that's not to say that everyone should think that way. It's just how I think. I think coaching is most meaningful when it's focused upon performance improvement.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to, when I'm working with individuals, the key for me is to make sure that they've had a really powerful impact, that the coaching has helped. But I think what you've just said there about is performance improvement. For me, one thing that I will dig down with a client at the beginning is they might say they want to improve this. So I will say to them, how will you know that you've improved this? What things will be happening what will you be hearing from other people or from yourself? What indicators will show that you've reached what it is that you want to reach? And I think sometimes that's how I get around some of these things that maybe feel a little bit more intangible. By developing your resilience, what does that mean that you will be able to do, or what will be happening if we develop your resilience?
And what's in the way? What are the obstacles you'll need to encounter? What are you going to do about that? And this is a level of reality that I fear many coaches don't get down to. I used to, when I had a job, which was up to July of 1992, I've been working for myself ever since. I don't really think of what I do as having a job at all. So back about 28 years ago when I had a job, I printed something off the plotter and I put it over the top of my door, which said, "Make it real and it will work." And to me, if you're working at a level of reality, it can be difficult, it can be tricky, it can be confusing, it can be frustrating, it can be disappointing, it can be annoying. But if you're not working at a level of reality, you're not being helpful. And I think, to me, evaluation is all about how have our conversations, which are focused on what's real for you, made an impact which is sustainable.
Yeah, sorry, I just got distracted then because I heard it was thunder. Sorry, it's just a load of snow that's just fallen off my roof for some reason. So sorry.
What has?
Snow. I don't know where you are, but I've got lots of snow. Sorry, distracted.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, I'll always pause for snow. My son's got a load of snow in Durham. I've got very little here. We had a bit, but in Gloucester, where I am, we don't get a lot. But in Durham, he's had all the Scottish snow that seems to have. So you might be getting the Durham snow, which is the Scottish snow, reaching you.
We had a big dump yesterday, a big dump of snow yesterday. So sorry, I missed that last point. Was there a question that you posed to me?
I don't know. I missed it too. I have to go back over the tape. I suppose what I'm saying, but I was talking about reality. I think as long as we're prepared and capable of working at a reality level with clients, we've got much more to go on with evaluation, because we can then say, what did you do to overcome those difficulties to doing this? What conversation did you have with that person that is your main blocker? I find myself spending a lot of time with coaching clients, getting to understand better their context, the people, the politics, the structures, the power games, because unless you understand those things, you can't be as helpful as you might be, and you can't work at a level of reality. Subsequently, you can't evaluate meaningfully, because the better you understand the variables, the more you can subsequently say, why was it that this didn't work as well as you would have liked it to? Was it down to this, that, or something else? And I think if we're blind of the context, we don't fully understand how best to measure our outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, because we don't want this to be sort of in isolation. The coaching should never just be in isolation. We can teach lots of sort of skills and tools and things within a coaching session, but unless it translates into reality outside in that workplace or in that life situation, it's not helpful, is it? So I think that is really important, and I always try and do that whenever I'm doing training and things, is actually, how do you apply this in real life? You know, it's wonderful having this technique, but actually, how does it work in reality? So when we're dealing with clients and people that we're coaching, like you say, it's really important to find out what's actually going on, and would that work for them as well, or can you think how this might, how might you put this into practice when you go back into the office this afternoon?
Yeah, I find myself, when I get to know a client well, talking about specific individuals in their workplace a lot. So, someone might have a problem with someone called, I don't know, Rebecca, for the sake of the argument. And so I'll find myself having a lot of conversations with them. How's things going with Rebecca? Are things changing with her? Are you able to get more value from your relationship, Rebecca? Is Rebecca still blocking everything you do? Are you, and that's good. And I think people really respond to that, because I think to show that level of interest in someone is a differentiator, because most coaches, in my humble opinion, an uninformed position, because I don't know most coaches, there's a lot of them out there, I suspect a lot of coaches, let's not say most, have no appetite for that. Have no appetite to show that interest in people, which creates a relationship which can become real in terms of the content of what you're doing, which when evaluated can be evaluated meaningful and from an informed perspective. Because when you evaluate subsequently, you say, well, I know why that was not as effective as we both like, and I know why that worked and it didn't. And to know those things and the whys behind it is as important as the feedback on that something happened or didn't.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, isn't it? Is sometimes just an awareness of things is the learning. from a session is something that we can take. You know, we have to be aware of things to make changes. And I think that where coaching can be really helpful, it is, for me, it's about raising awareness of people's thought processes, behaviours, the reasons why they're doing something. And I think this is where coaching can be really tangible, is because if they have that awareness of why they're doing something or why they're experiencing this difficulty, that's when you have the power to do something about it. And that's where
I've got roles, responsibilities and so on in that. And we mentioned earlier that we can do so much, and we can do a lot to help this process. We can't do it all, and we can't do the most important things, which is the application of learning. We aren't in our client's workplace. We aren't doing what they do. We aren't facing what they face to bring the value back from this process. And so clarity from the outset and reminder constantly that the people we work with carry the primary responsibility for value creation. That sounds a bit textbooky. I'll say that again, that the people we work with have the primary responsibility for value creation. That's just reality, because they go back to a workplace that we don't. And they've got to have the appetite for that. They've got to be prepared to take on the difficulties, because it's never easy to apply the learning which makes change. And that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to do.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's just making me think now, actually, is how can I help my clients prepare that and use that information more effectively when they go back out of that session, you know. And I hope I would always get them to think about how can they apply this, but maybe I need to be a little bit more clear, precise about how will you use this now? How do you think this is going to work? Can you foresee any problems with this, so that we can address it still while we're in that coaching situation? Because things won't always work out straight away. So they might have an idea of, actually, this person is a bugger to work with. I know they're going to throw back at me. So then we can work it out, and then, okay, well, how do we get around that? What steps can you put in place to enable you to deal with this difficult situation?
Well, absolutely. And I think this also comes back to evaluation, in as much that, what do we evaluate? And I think we need clarity if we're evaluating coaches included. We need clarity about what precisely we're evaluating. Yes, we want to establish what learnings being applied. But I think we should also be interested, particularly if we're working with an organization, to at least draw that information out that can be shared around what were the inhibitors, what were the facilitators, as I used to call it, of learning. So if I'm sitting down with a corporate client, I would like them to think, this hardly ever happens, I would like to think at the end of the process, they would have a meaningful evaluation discussion with me, free, I'll do it for free, where we can sit down and say, right, let's talk about this coaching that's cost you all this money and see what value you've got. Because my feeling is these are the things that I've detected are helping people to put this into practice in the organization. And these are things that are really thoroughly getting in the way. I do not find much appetite for that. I do not find a corporate client typically particularly bothered about evaluation at all, let's be straight, and particularly not having the appetite I wish they had to talk about inhibitors and facilitators. It's your line management. They don't let people do anything new. It's your processes. They're too complicated. You've got to go through too many filters to change things around here. They don't want to know about that stuff.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And do you think they don't want to know because it's too uncomfortable? Do you just think or do you think it's because they don't actually see the value in actually doing that evaluation?
I'd say both. It's a cop-out answer, but I think both. And I'm not damning everybody. That isn't always the case. There are clients with whom I have, and I got one now, a dialogue, not just at the end, but a dialogue of what do you think's working, what's getting in the way, that sort of stuff. And that's great, but I don't always get it. And I go beyond, not always. I rarely get it. Any attempt to engage a corporate client in let's talk about what's working here and what isn't usually gets the whoa, I don't know about that, I've never been there before type look on their face.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Sometimes we've already touched on this a little bit, but it can be uncomfortable, you know, getting some of this feedback can be really uncomfortable. And I think there's two elements of feedback, the evaluation for me is, one, I want to understand the impact for my client, what they've learned, what they've taken from it, what's been useful.
Yeah.
So from their point of view, but I also want to know about my own performance. So I want to know whether they think I've been a good coach, and what elements of a coach have worked well for them. What things could I improve or do differently? So there's almost two aspects of evaluation there for me, and I just wonder whether lumping them together in one is not necessarily the best way of doing that now.
I think this is a wider issue than coaching evaluation. I think evaluation too often focuses on the delivery. I've seen I started collecting it sometime. Ford, I'm prepared to say Ford, F-O-R-D, had a terrible evaluation form that basically said, what did you think of the trainer? Was he any good? Did the food arrive on time? What do you think of the food? Was it all right? And was the room all right? And I thought, hang on a minute, where's the questions that say, what are you going to do when you get back to work? No, all they were interested in were the hygiene factors, as Hertzberg used to call them, the stuff that did no more at level 1, Kirkpatrick reaction. Was the room nice? Did they feel the hotel they were staying in was a nice hotel? They asked these sorts of questions. I thought, where's the meaningful questions? So I think an awful lot of evaluation, whether it's for coaching or anything else, is too focused on the things that it needn't be focused upon, and not sufficiently focused on what it should be, which is about what did you learn, what are you going to do about it, what's going to get in the way, what are you going to do about overcoming those problems.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? I think some of that, like you say, the basic information about whether the food arrived on time, was it good, blah, 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 it's helpful to a degree, but not for the, actually not for the person,
Only
that's not really appropriate, is it? But yeah, so I think that the different elements of the Kirkpatrick model is interesting, isn't it? And I think perhaps this is when we need to think about, right, at what points do we do the evaluation? What are we evaluating, and why do we want to do it? Because what are we going to do with this information? Ultimately, will having this information enhance anything?
Yeah, will something is a fundamental? Okay, we're up around the sort of timings, and we can go on for hours on this. We might have to return to. We're up around the sort of timings we usually are. So, in summary, what for you at a personal level has been the value of this? Let's take our own medicine. I'm asking you an immediate feedback question. Okay, we just invested 42 minutes of our valuable time in this. What do you think you've got from this, given that you are only reacting to what we discuss, haven't thought about it? But what's your immediate reflections on the value you've got from this?
I think it's made me think about evaluation in other ways. So I think there's elements of this that I want to go away and think about a little bit more thoroughly, and in terms of looking at the different elements of evaluation. When am I doing that with my clients, and what do I do with that information as well? So it's raised a few questions for me. It's not necessarily answered things, it's just raised the question that I need to go away and think about. Yeah,
I'd echo that. And I'd add to it that, like you, I'm thinking about things I wouldn't have thought about, which is why we do these things to a large degree. In preparation for this, and that means 5 minutes before we got started, in relation to, I prepared, I've got notes, I've got all sorts here, but I thought, hang on, I've not read much about the evaluation of coaching. So I did a quick literature search. There's quite a bit out there, but it doesn't shout at you. It's not things I'd come across before. And so I'm going to, as a result of this, dig a bit more into the literature, see if I can get some more ideas and thoughts around specifically the evaluation of coaching than I did before. So it's prompting me into initially that, and then I look for videos and that sort of stuff. So there's stuff out there I want to know more about around this.
Definitely, and I think it also will help us to demonstrate the value of coaching to our clients, whether that's individual clients or corporate clients. And I think ultimately, if we can demonstrate the value and impact that coaching has, that does everybody a good thing.
I believe it does. You've got a place not to stop. Thank you very much indeed.